Okay, so we've got some really interesting stuff to dive into today, thanks to you. You
Yeah.
sent over some fascinating material on back office outsourcing in the oil and gas industry. And a lot of it really focuses on this company, EAG Inc., but also like the bigger picture of how these energy companies can keep things running smoothly when, the economy throws a curveball.
Right, right.
So today, I think our mission is to really get a grasp on how outsourcing these back office tasks can actually make oil and gas companies more agile and resilient, ready to handle those ups and downs that always seem to hit this industry.
Absolutely.
And the sources you gave us, I mean, they're a great mix. We've got that overview straight from EAG Inc., and then this really insightful article that digs into the whole strategic side of outsourcing.
Yeah, I think putting those two perspectives together is going to give us a great understanding of what's going on in the energy sector right now, and even more importantly, what you as someone working in this space can do about it.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly are we talking about when we say back office in oil and gas? And specifically, upstream and midstream.
Okay.
Because that EAG overview, it really lays it out clearly. They're talking about those land accounting and production professionals, and they're handling some pretty important tasks,
For sure.
like processing revenue
Uh,
and managing joint interest billing, which I guess in simple terms is how costs are split up among the different owners of a well or a project.
exactly.
Then you've got the whole production oversight piece
Yeah.
and all the regulatory reporting that goes with it.
Right.
It sounds like a really fundamental part of how these companies work.
It is. It is.
It's not just like some extra stuff.
No, not at all. These are core functions.
And what EAG really stresses is the flexibility they offer, which I think for anyone in the energy sector today, that's got to be key.
Oh, absolutely, because the market is so unpredictable right now.
Exactly.
So having that flexibility is crucial.
And it's not like this all or nothing outsourcing thing. They can handle the whole function for you or just come in and support specific projects. They can even act as like a temporary backfill if you're short-staffed or if you're expanding or you've just acquired another company. They can help you scale up quickly. So they've really thought about how to adapt to different needs.
It seems like they've built their whole approach around being adaptable.
Right, and they break their services down into these key areas. And I think it highlights exactly where that flexibility comes in.
Okay.
So there's accounting outsourcing, which they say can save you time and money, which, who doesn't want that, right?
That's always welcome.
Then there's land administration outsourcing. Focus on getting you accurate data and insights, but insights that you can actually use to make decisions.
Right. Actionable information.
And then there's this volumetric accounting outsourcing, which is all about making sure your operations are running as efficiently as possible and that you're following all the regulations.
Compliance is huge. Yep.
And finally, staff augmentation and special projects, which sounds like a way to get your hands on some specialized expertise exactly when you need it without having to commit long term.
Yeah. So you're not stuck with extra staff when things slow down.
Exactly.
You can adjust your resources as needed.
Okay, so we've got these specific services that EAG offers, and then we've got this scaling operations article that talks about all the economic uncertainty hitting the energy sector. And when you put those two things together, you start to see why this kind of flexible support is becoming so important.
Yeah, because the article really paints a picture of, like, what they call a perfect storm of challenges.
It's not just one thing, is it? It's like a whole bunch of factors hitting at the same time.
Right, exactly.
You've got oil prices that are all over the place.
Mhm.
I mean, the article says that WTI crude swung by more than 30% in just one quarter.
Wow.
Yeah, so if you're trying to plan and budget, it makes it incredibly difficult.
I can imagine.
And then, of course, you've got all the geopolitical stuff, which always seems to have a ripple effect on energy markets.
Uh-huh. Never a dull moment there.
And then you layer on top of that all the changes in regulations, new environmental policies, carbon reduction mandates.
Right, those are big shifts.
Plus, investors are being really cautious right now. I mean, who can blame them? The future is so uncertain.
Right,
So it's harder to get funding for new projects.
right.
And then, on top of all of that, you've got global trade issues like tariffs. The article specifically mentions how steel tariffs added a whopping 25% to the cost of building new infrastructure.
Ouch.
Yeah, so it's like all these pressures coming from different directions.
Yeah, it's a lot to handle.
And it's really interesting, this McKinsey analysis that they quote in the article. It says that 68% of energy executives now say that operational flexibility is their top priority.
Overgrowth.
That's a huge shift,
That's a huge shift.
especially compared to like before 2020,
Right.
when everyone was focused on expansion.
Exactly.
So that really shows you how much the landscape has changed. And it leads to what they call in the article the scalability paradox, which is basically this catch-22. Energy companies need to be able to scale up quickly to take advantage of those market upswings when they happen. But at the same time, they need to be able to cut costs drastically and minimize those fixed expenses when there's a downturn.
Yeah, you got to be ready for anything.
It's a real balancing act.
It is.
And there's this quote from an energy economist, Maria Ramirez, that really stood out to me. She says that companies with inflexible operational structures are at a significant disadvantage in this kind of environment.
Yeah, you can't just stick with the old ways of doing things anymore.
And that brings us back to outsourcing, because the article really positions it as a way to solve this problem.
Okay, how so?
Well, traditionally back office functions, they're a fixed cost. You've got your staff, your office space, all that overhead.
Right.
But with outsourcing, you can turn those fixed costs into variable expenses. So instead of being locked into a certain level of spending, no matter what's happening in the market, you can adjust your back office support based on how much activity you actually have.
So you only pay for what you need.
Exactly.
That's smart.
And the article cites some research from Deloitte that found some pretty impressive potential benefits.
Like what?
Well, they say that outsourcing can reduce administrative overhead by 28%. It can speed up the implementation of process changes by 40%. And it can improve your ability to handle changes in workload by 35%.
Those are significant improvements.
They are, especially when you think about how tight margins are in the energy industry right now and how important it is to be able to react quickly to changes in the market.
Yeah, every little bit helps.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific back office functions that could really benefit from this kind of scalable approach. I mean, accounting and financial operations seem like a prime example, right?
For sure, because the workload there can go up and down pretty dramatically, just depending on how much activity there is.
So when things are booming, you've got a ton of transactions to process, complex revenue accounting to manage, and a lot of financial reporting to do. But even when things slow down, you still need to do things like detailed cost analysis and financial modeling to help you make smart decisions.
Right, so it's not like it completely goes away.
You know, it just shifts a bit. And EAG, they talk about their modular approach, which sounds like you can basically pick and choose which accounting functions you need help with, and then scale them up or down as needed, like building blocks.
That's a good way to put it.
And they give this great example of a producer in the Permian Basin who managed to cut their accounting costs by 42% in just 30 days during that 2020 downturn.
Wow, that's fast.
And then when activity picked back up, they were able to scale back up smoothly.
So they were prepared for both scenarios.
Exactly.
That's impressive.
The article also lists a bunch of those specialized energy accounting functions that are particularly well suited for outsourcing. Things like joint interest billing, revenue accounting, division order processing, production tax reporting, and all the documentation you need for regulatory compliance.
It's a lot of specialized knowledge.
It is, and it's stuff where you don't necessarily need a full-time in-house team working at full capacity all the time.
Makes sense.
Okay, so then you've got land administration, and you might think that if there's less drilling going on, the land department would have less work to do. But the article actually points out that it can get even more complex during a downturn.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Well, you've got things like changes in ownership and even bankruptcies to deal with. So managing your existing assets and navigating all those complexities, it actually requires a very specific kind of expertise, and it could actually increase the workload in certain areas.
I wouldn't have thought of that.
And EAG offers scalable resources for all sorts of things, like managing lease records, handling curative work and title documentation, administering surface and mineral rights, monitoring lease expirations, and making sure everything's compliant with regulations so you can keep your records accurate and stay on top of all the legal stuff without having a big land department sitting around when things are slow.
It's all about right-sizing your resources.
And they give this example of a producer in the Rocky Mountains who were able to use EAG to scale their land administration capabilities from just basic maintenance all the way up to supporting a full acquisition. And they did it in a matter of weeks.
That's impressive.
So it really shows how quickly you can adapt with the right partner. And it's not just the financial and administrative side of things either. Production and operations support. that can benefit from this scalability too.
Okay, I'm curious, how so?
Well, take regulatory reporting, for example. The price of oil might be down, but you still have to do all that reporting.
Right, the regulations don't just go away. So having access to scalable solutions for things like managing production data, generating those regulatory reports, even collecting data from pumpers out in the field, tracking and analyzing downtime, ensuring ongoing compliance, and handling all the environmental reporting. Those are all functions that you need to keep doing no matter what the market's doing.
And outsourcing lets you do that without having to carry a big fixed cost for those functions year-round.
Makes a lot of sense.
And we can't forget about IT and systems support.
Yeah.
Everything in the energy sector relies on technology these days, but maintaining a full in-house IP team, it could be a huge expense.
Especially if you don't need their full attention all the time.
Exactly.
So what's the alternative?
Well, with outsourced IT, you can get support on demand, you can have your infrastructure maintained without having full-time specialists on your payroll, you can optimize your systems during slower periods to make them more efficient, and you can have robust security monitoring and compliance.
Which is essential no matter what.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like outsourcing IT can be a win-win.
It really can. Okay, so the article then goes into some really interesting case studies that show how this actually plays out in real-world situations. So the first one is about an independent operator who got hit hard by that price collapse in 2020.
Oh, yeah, that was a tough time for a lot of companies.
It was.
So what happened to this operator?
Well, they were in a really tough spot, facing a serious threat to their survival. But they decided to go all in on outsourcing. And the results were pretty dramatic. They reduced their administrative headcount from 32 down to 9.
Wow, that's a big cut.
And they did it in just 2 months. They cut their back office costs by 61%. And they still managed to stay 100% compliant with all the regulations.
That's remarkable.
And the CEO of the company, he said that this strategy not only allowed them to survive, but it actually gave them a competitive advantage when the market eventually recovered.
So they came out of it stronger?
Exactly.
That's a powerful testament to the value of being adaptable.
It really is.
What about the other case studies?
Okay, so the next one is about a midstream company that was dealing with the impact of tariffs. So they were getting squeezed from both sides. Their costs were going up because of the tariffs, but the amount of product they were moving was going down.
So their revenue is taking a hit too.
Exactly.
A tough situation.
But they also turned to outsourcing, and they saw some significant benefits. They reduced their administrative costs by 37%. They shifted to a variable cost structure, so their costs were directly tied to how much product they were actually moving. And even though they had fewer in-house staff, they were still able to maintain the quality of their financial reporting.
And what's really interesting is that they were able to redirect over $3 million that they would have spent on administrative costs. And they used it to invest in essential maintenance for their infrastructure.
So they were able to make strategic investments.
Yeah.
Even during a tough time.
Yeah.
And the CFO of the company, he said that outsourcing allowed them to finally match their costs to their reduced revenue, which is exactly what you need to do in that kind of situation. Okay, so the last case study is about a growing producer who had this really aggressive acquisition strategy. They were expanding at an incredible pace, going from 200 wells to over 1,200 wells in just 18 months.
That's a lot of growth in a short amount of time.
It is, and they managed to do it. While keeping their internal team incredibly lean, they only had 15 people, focused on the core technical side of their business.
So how did they handle all that extra work?
Outsourcing.
Okay.
They outsourced all their back office functions, and they estimated that they avoided $4.8 million in annual fixed overhead costs by doing so. And the president of the company, he said that this approach gave their investors more confidence because they had built a business model that was really resilient to market fluctuations.
So it wasn't just about saving money, it was about building a stronger, more sustainable business.
Exactly.
So we've looked at the what and the why of outsourcing. Now let's talk about the how.
Okay, sounds good.
The article outlines some best practices for implementing this effectively. And the first one is to do a function-based scalability assessment.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It means you need to take a tailored approach, instead of just trying to outsource everything in the same way.
So different functions will have different needs
Exactly.
when it comes to scalability.
Because some functions might be really sensitive to changes in production volume, while others might not be affected as much.
Okay, that makes sense.
And some functions might have really strict regulatory requirements, while others might have more flexibility.
Right.
And you also have to think about how much each function relies on technology and how complex it would be to transfer knowledge to an outsourced team.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
No, definitely not.
And it sounds like EAG actually helps their clients develop these function-specific profiles to figure out the best outsourcing strategy.
That's a valuable service.
It is.
So what's the next best practice?
Well, then you've got the service level agreements.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
SLAs, which are basically the contracts that you put in place with your outsourcing partner.
Okay.
But the article stresses that these SLAs, they need to be designed with flexibility in mind.
So it's not just about defining what services will be provided. It's about how those service levels can be adjusted as your needs change.
So things like volume-based pricing structures, where you pay more when you're using more services and less when you're using less, and the ability to change the scope of services depending on how much activity you have, and clear expectations for response times under different scenarios, and even strategies for retaining and transferring knowledge during slower periods.
So it's all about having that built-in flexibility.
Exactly.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, there's technology, which plays a huge role in making all of this possible.
Absolutely, because modern outsourcing solutions rely heavily on technology platforms.
And EAG talks about their energy-specific systems that are designed to do things like rapidly onboard new assets that you acquire, efficiently process large volumes of data, automatically monitor for compliance issues, and ensure a seamless transfer of knowledge and processes between different resources.
So it's not just about people, it's about having the right technology in place.
And the final best practice that they mention is the hybrid model, which basically means you don't have to outsource everything.
Okay, I like that idea.
You can choose to keep some functions in-house, especially those core functions, where you want to maintain a certain level of control. And then you can use outsourced resources to handle those peak workloads, or to help you cut costs during a downturn.
So you've got the best of both worlds.
Okay, so the article also talks about how outsourcing can help you run a leaner operation when there's a downturn in the market. And it's not just about cutting costs. It's about being strategic with your resources.
Right, you want to make sure you're preserving those core capabilities that are essential for generating revenue.
Exactly.
So by outsourcing those non-core back office functions, you can free up your resources to focus on things like your engineering and geoscience expertise. And maintaining that operational knowledge, that will be crucial when the market recovers.
And there's this quote from an executive in the article that really sums it up. He says, "We made a conscious decision to keep our technical team intact during the downturn because we knew they would be essential for our future success."
Smart move.
It was.
And the article also talks about how outsourcing can improve your financial visibility during tough times.
Which is so important for making informed decisions.
Absolutely, because you need to be able to see exactly where your money is going.
So having access to things like detailed cost analysis and the ability to run different scenarios to see how different decisions might play out, and improved cash flow forecasting, and making sure you're staying compliant with all the regulations, those are all crucial for navigating a downturn effectively.
Yeah, you need all the information you can get.
And the article makes the point that companies that have used outsourcing strategically during a downturn, they're often in a much stronger position when the market starts to recover.
That makes sense.
Because they don't have to spend a lot of time and money rehiring and retraining administrative staff.
Right, they can just scale back up with their outsourcing partner.
And they can redirect their capital towards activities that will generate new value.
Yeah.
And they can respond more quickly to new opportunities.
Yeah.
Because they're not bogged down by all that administrative overhead.
So they're agile and ready to go.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about the future of all this? What's on the horizon for scalable back office solutions?
Well, the article talks about some really interesting developments, like AI-enhanced scalability.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
It is, because artificial intelligence can automate a lot of those routine tasks, like transaction processing. And machine learning algorithms can constantly monitor for compliance issues. And predictive analytics can help you forecast your future resource needs based on what's happening in the market.
So it's like having a crystal ball.
In a way, yeah. And EAG, they actually talk about how they're incorporating these technologies into their solutions, which shows that they're really committed to staying ahead of the curve.
That's important in a fast-moving industry like energy.
It is.
What else did the article mention?
Well, there's this concept of microservice outsourcing, which is basically about outsourcing even more specific processes. So instead of outsourcing an entire department, you might just outsource one specific task.
Okay, so it's even more granular than before.
Exactly.
Like what kind of tasks?
Well, they give examples like maintaining land records, or calculating revenue
So
distributions.
it's about getting really precise with your outsourcing.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then there are these virtual shared service models, which are basically a way for multiple companies to share the cost of certain functions.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a cooperative approach.
It is. So instead of each company having to maintain its own in-house team for things like regulatory compliance or data management, they can share the cost of a centralized team that provides those services to all of them.
That's a clever way to reduce costs and share expertise.
It is. And EAG is actually a pioneer in developing these virtual shared service models, which suggests that they see a lot of potential in this approach for the future.
So it sounds like the future of back office outsourcing is all about more flexibility, more specialization, and more collaboration.
Okay, so I think it's pretty clear that operational scalability isn't just a nice to have anymore. It's a must-have for energy companies that want to survive and thrive in this uncertain market.
I agree completely.
And back office outsourcing, it's a really powerful tool for achieving that scalability.
Because it allows you to turn those fixed costs into variable expenses, and that gives you the flexibility to adapt to whatever the market throws at you.
And the article ends with this really thought-provoking question. It says, for energy executives navigating today's uncertain landscape, the fundamental question isn't whether back-office functions can be outsourced. It's whether they can afford the inflexibility of keeping them all in-house.
That's a great point to ponder.
It really is.
So it sounds like the message is clear. If you want to be successful in the energy industry today, you need to embrace operational scalability, and outsourcing is a key way to achieve that.
Well, thank you for taking this deep dive with me. It's been a really fascinating exploration of back-office outsourcing and how it can help energy companies build resilience in a constantly changing market.
My pleasure. I always enjoy these deep dives.
And a huge thank you to you for sharing these insightful sources with us.